But welcome anyway. And I'm glad to meet you, glad that you've gone to part of the front line and made it back safely. And I'm very glad that we could host you here. I don't want to go through the history of Atmis and how it came about, because I think by now you should know, right? We have a pretty good idea. So I just want to very briefly, even though I know you know, go through why we are doing this. This is not the first time we've done it, but I think it's an important initiative to embed journalists with our troops, because it's important, I think, because you are sending, as troop contributing countries, TCCs, you are sending your young, fit, healthy soldiers to what is a very dangerous environment. And I think maybe having been to the field, you've got some idea of it. And sadly, some of them won't make it back home. Some of them will make it back home badly injured. Last week I was in Nairobi. I visited some of them in the hospital. One soldier completely paraplegic from the neck down. Another soldier caught up in last week's massive bomb blast in Beledweyne, and he lost 2 fingers. So I think it's important for you to see the sacrifices they are making in Somalia, so that your readers and your citizens in your countries can be informed about what's going on. I think it's always critical for a healthy democracy that the citizens are well informed. And what is being done in Somalia is absolutely vital for the well-being of Somalia, but also the region as a whole, because we have seen, especially the Kenyans, but not only the Kenyans, but seen the spillover effect of what happens in Somalia, in Kenya, and the security situation in Kenya. And I don't have to remind you of what has happened in recent years. So I think for us it's important, and after a couple of years where this didn't happen because, of course, COVID, we are now reviving this initiative. The first countries in this revival of this initiative were Burundi and Kenya. And then we move on to the other troop contributing countries, Uganda, Ethiopia, and Djibouti. And then also, of course, to the police contributing countries in addition, Sierra Leone, Nigeria, and Ghana. So that will be in the next phase. But I don't want to speak too much. I really want to hear from you, actually, because I think I'm eager to hear what, having been to the field, to the front line, to your own troops, what are your thoughts? What are your impressions of what you have seen? And what do you think this will mean when you go back to your countries and go back to your jobs? So, but I'm also willing to take any questions that you might have, but I really would like to hear from you. I know it's unusual for journalists to be on the other side, because you're always asking questions, but I think it's also important that we are able to hear what you thought. Is this a worthwhile initiative in the first place? Should we continue it? What things could be done differently, perhaps? I know I was told, or I'm aware of the problems that the Kenyan journalists had going to Doble. I don't know if you are aware of why, and then I want to tell you why so you can see the links that everything has with everything else. The reason we were not able to take you to Doble is because Doble is only accessible via helicopter, and 8 helicopters were grounded on the 15th of September. And the reason they were grounded is because of an ICAO decision, the International Civil Aviation Organization, I think it's called, related to the conflict in Ukraine. So all Russian aircraft globally have been grounded. So it means that the only helicopters that we have right now are the 2 helicopters that we source from other countries other than Russia, which are used exclusively for Medivac. So basically, it's a logistical issue which is facing all of the UN missions, all African Union missions, because we can't access helicopters. And as you should know, the helicopter market is a very limited market. Almost every country gets their helicopters, these type of utility helicopters, from Russia. So you begin to see the links between what's happening here and what's happening in other parts of the world. And I think it's important that you understand those types of links as well. It again makes it, I think, more relevant for your work. So with those very few remarks, I want to open the floor to you, to hear what you have to say, what you think, what you learned, what you saw, and what you will take back when you go to Kenya and Burundi. Okay, let me start. Let me just go through those questions. I think one question which is raised by, I think all of you who spoke, is the issue of the deadline for the exit of the mission. And that is, I mean, that's an issue that's a matter of concern to everybody. There are a number of concerns that we have to address. One, and it goes back to something else that has also been raised by a number of you, is the question of financing. Atmis, as we all know, is financed by non-African sources. So we have the UN, which provides logistical support through a package of assessed contributions. So these are contributions made by all member states to the UN peacekeeping budget. And then you have the EU and the United Kingdom that provide support to the troops themselves, the stipends. Now, the problem is that for the last 15 years, it's really been the EU. It's the only source of financing for AMISOM. Of course, now the UK is split from the EU, but it still contributes. So that's why it's now the EU plus the UK. And unfortunately, as a funding model, it's not sustainable. And we have not, despite numerous efforts by the African Union, by the United Nations as well, we have not been able to secure additional sources of funding from other partners, despite our efforts. So I think the partners have, the EU and the UK, have sort of reached a point where donor fatigue has set in, and they have made it known that they cannot continue with, to be the sole financer for the mission in terms of salaries and troop stipends. The EU has provided over $2 billion to date, $2 billion US dollars to date to finance this mission since 2007. It's a lot of money for an organization to provide to a conflict that is not even in their own backyard. But so I think this is one of the things that has been a key driver of this move to exit. But also, I think it's important to acknowledge that at the end of the day, Somalia has to take responsibility for itself. I mean, and it wants to. That is why, the mandate that we have for the exit of Atmis by 2024 is something that was done in full consultation with the Somali government. The Somali government actually was in the driving seat in defining what the mandate should be, what the concept of operations should be. Of course, it's not to deny that there are huge challenges. We have not progressed as far as we should in the implementation of the first phase, because if you look at the mandate is divided into four phases. So the first phase, which was from 1st of April to the 31st of December 2022, is what is regarded as the reconfiguration phase. Of course, there have been serious delays in that phase, which were occasioned by the prolonged election period in Somalia, which saw the government only being formed quite late, what was it, August, I think, July, August, when the government was formed. So a lot of time was lost. I think the first 3 to 4 months was lost because of that political process that was still ongoing, negotiations to, first of all, to finalize the elections by May, and then the inauguration of the president in June, then the appointment of the prime minister, and then the long drawn-out negotiations to form a cabinet, which was inclusive. So, as I say, 4 months were lost because of that. And then, of course, something which had not been foreseen, but which, when it happened, the government took a decision, a right decision, I believe, to take advantage of this. And this was the, what you may call the popular mobilization against Al-Shabaab that has swept, especially the central parts of Somalia, Galmudug and Hirshabelle, which has also now taken away focus from some of the other things that they were supposed to do in the first phase. But I think it was important to use the opportunity which was provided by local communities just saying, we've had enough, enough is enough. Al-Shabaab can't continue to terrorize us and extort from us. And in an environment of drought and hunger, food shortages, where Al-Shabaab was still demanding zakat in the form of livestock and very little bit of property that they still have 4 times a year. And I think local communities decided enough is enough. We can't wait for somebody else to save us, we need to save ourselves. So the government, I think, rightly saw this as an opportunity to start seriously degrading Al-Shabaab. And so that has now taken away some of the attention from some of the other things that they were expected to do. Because the whole idea is that the mission, Atmis, would exit by 2024, but it would be a progressive exit, starting with the first drawdown of 2,000 troops by the end of December 2022, which is only 2 months away from now, right? But in order to do that, to remove 2,000 troops from the mission area, it means that some of the forward operating bases which you've been to have to be handed over to the Somalis. But now the Somalis are not focusing on taking over that, they're focusing on the offensive. So yes, our timetable is already slipping drastically, I think. So we need to find ways of how to manage the situation. Having said that, for Atmis, our obligation is to implement the mandate. The government has informed us in numerous meetings that they are not ready yet to see the drawdown of the first 2,000. But it's not up to us to take that decision. That's a decision of the Security Council. So only the Security Council, which was the organ which provided the final mandate to which the funding is tied, right, can change that mandate. So we are still, certainly as far as Atmis is concerned, working on the basis that unless and until we see some change from the Security Council, we have to do what we are told to do in terms of this existing mandate. So, but it is difficult, it is challenging, I will not deny, because if we withdraw before the government is able to exercise responsibility for security in these regions, we just provide an opening for Al-Shabaab, which is the last thing we want to do. So we need to find ways to manage all of these things at the same time. So yes, it might be the case that the other issue, let me just say, the way the mandate is structured, the existing mandate that was adopted on the 30th of March, Resolution 2628 of the Security Council. The way it is structured, the first drawdown of 2,000 troops must take place in December, and after that, they will do an assessment to see if we proceed to the next drawdown by September next year. So it might be the case that they'll say that based on our assessment, we have to postpone the final exit by 2024. That is always a possibility, but it's a decision that will be made by the Security Council based on an assessment, a joint assessment done by the AU, the UN, and the federal government of Somalia. So it is still, even in terms of the current mandate, a strong possibility that if the conclusion is that the government is not yet in a position, then there will be an extension of the mandate. But that can only be determined after an assessment, okay? So with regard to, the issue of Al-Shabaab's ability to tax, that is, we had a discussion on this today with another partner. The United Nations' own Sanctions Committee experts estimate that between $120 and $150 million is earned, extorted, whatever, by Al-Shabaab each year. That's a lot of money, and they use that to buy weapons. But this is, as I say, this is information that is all open source. It's the UN's own estimates. So they do this by a combination of extortion. We call it tax, but it's actually extortion. They threaten businesses, individuals. If you do not pay them, then either your property will be destroyed, or your children will be kidnapped, your sons forced into become fighters, so those types of things. So, and they have an extensive network throughout the country. From what I understand, they have the people who know exactly what is coming in the port. So anybody who's importing must give a percentage of the value of their goods. So yes, they have a very elaborate system. The government is now working very hard on a number of different pillars to try and address this. So they are working with including Atmis, but also other partners, including the United Nations, and other bilateral partners, to enhance its capability, police capability, and to identify and close down these taps of resources, money. They've also, especially in the last weeks, as part of this, what you could call a wave, really, it's really a wave, and it's growing and growing, this anti-Shabaab sentiment, because as I said, Al-Shabaab has, over the years, built up this elaborate system where they force people to pay a tax, or it's almost like a protection racket, a mafia type of thing. And if you don't, there was an interview that President Hassan Sheikh gave to an organization, I think it might have been the Brookings Institute a couple of weeks ago, where he relayed an example of a hotel owner, I think, who, when they refused, to pay this tax, the hotel was just blown to bits. So what do you do in that situation? You pay, right? So what the government is now doing, and they've issued a number of decrees in recent weeks, is to now start putting some of the onus back on those who are paying, to say that you are not allowed to pay. Yesterday we were told also, even in terms of rental accommodation, if as a landlord it is found that you are renting your property to a tenant who is planning Al-Shabaab attacks from that property, you run the risk of forfeiting your property. So the government is now really putting pressure on ordinary Somalis not to support in any way Al-Shabaab activities. So hopefully that will have an impact on the fundraising ability of Al-Shabaab. We hope so. The issue of clan, the issue of clan is a very contentious and complex issue in Somalia. Somalis all identify themselves generally as being members of a clan. Historically, I'm not sure that was always the case, but I think certainly in the post-1990s period, with the collapse of the state, clan became much more important. So it's not possible for the government at this point to ignore clan. Atmis tries as much as possible not to get involved in clan politics, So certainly we do not want to inflame these types of cleavages within the society. So we try to work with Somalis as Somalis, while knowing, of course, that clan is important for Somalis, but we do not want to inflame those types of situations. The question, what somebody said, I think it was you, said the attitude that Atmis is an exercise in futility, why don't we just pack up and leave Somalis to their own devices? Well, as a Kenyan, I think you should know why. We've seen what happened in Westgate, in Garissa, in Mandera, in Uganda. We know that Al-Shabaab does not respect borders. It sees itself as a sort of pan-regional organization that, according to its own ideology, wants to unite all Muslims, what do they call it, the Ummah, in a sort of caliphate, which is ruled by their interpretation of Sharia. And for them, borders don't mean anything. So it's not about packing up and leaving Somalis to their devices, because it's something that would affect the entire region. We saw, when was it, in July, when the first time possibly ever a major Al-Shabaab incursion into Ethiopia that had always been relatively secure from Al-Shabaab. So now moving there. So it's not possible really to say, okay, just pack up and leave them, because they're not going to leave you. They will, So I think so Atmis, like AMISOM, was an exercise in supporting the Somalis, but also supporting a regional approach to security, because this is an attempt to also secure the other countries in the region. You can't do that if you just leave Al-Shabaab, because Al-Shabaab sees its vision as going beyond Somalia to the entire region. I mean, in the past, they have bombed in Tanzania. So I think that's that. I think I've addressed the issues that were raised. I don't know if any other questions. Well, this is our whole idea. We need to defeat them before that. That's that's a plan, you know. The plan isn't to just leave in 2024. The plan is to work to defeat them so that we can leave in 2024. And if they are not defeated, as I said, there is a process built into the mandate to do an assessment, you know, to see whether the time is actually ripe. Because it would be very irresponsible, you know, to just say, okay, 2024, we're packing our bags and going, if the threat still exists then. We hope that, especially with the current offensive, you know, an organization like Al-Shabaab, I mean, it's terrorist, right? But you need to understand what that word actually means. It rules by fear. It doesn't even have to kill every day, you know, but it has to have this threat that it can do terrible damage to you if you try to resist. And so people have for a long time been not loyal, submissive, submitting to Al-Shabaab because they fear what Al-Shabaab could do to them, to their families. Because Al-Shabaab, we've seen, they are ruthless. So what we are seeing with this current popular uprising is the fear that has always allowed Al-Shabaab to operate is weakening, you know. Yesterday we were discussing, I likened it to a spell, a witch's spell, you know. When the spell breaks and the witch no longer has any magical powers over you. That's what we are seeing, I think. And if it continues, this can make a huge difference because you can't really rule over people if you don't have some form of acquiescence and submission from them. And they have made it clear, certainly in the regions we are seeing, that no more. They can't take any more.